Hindy, and I'm your host for We Win Within, where we share the stories of life-changing journeys. And today we have a special guest, Baird. I've known Brian for a long time, and he's a hypnotherapist, a business coach, but today he's going to take us on a journey. And the topic of the journey is, how do I feel safe in a chaotic world? Brian, take it from here.
Well, I appreciate your making it. So I'm going to take everybody on a journey from how to feel safe. Hopefully it's a great conversation that we have here that sort of illustrates what safety is all about. I'd like to point out is thank you for talking about my activities or credentials or whatever they are, but I'm not here to talk about those things per se, right? You and I have always had these rich conversations about what's going on in the world and some of the things that are happening that can leave us feeling incomplete or unsettled or whatever the case may be, or for that matter, unsafe. And one of the things that's really powerful about what you're doing here with WeWinWithin is we're looking at exploring our own inner space, so to speak, what's inside of us. And what makes that really important for me for this conversation is it's in that place where we get to find the safety. Because you definitely don't want to have a home that's under fire every day. If I was living in Ukraine or Israel or Palestine or maybe now Haiti, which is now actively in the news, I would say there's a pretty good chance that my external environment is so horrifically chaotic that safety would be a real big challenge. And there may be other places in the world where there is that kind of military conflict type stuff that's going on. But let's talk about the rest of the world, which is, statistically, we are at, and have been for quite a while, the safest time in world history. And I know it's hard to say that when we see all these things that are conflict. That's the news pouring that stuff onto us. And it doesn't mean that those conflicts aren't important to observe, and it's not like we just pretend they're not happening or anything like that. It's just that for us to feel unsafe, in many cases, it's really not about real safety. It's about what's going on inside of us that can unsettle us and make us feel unsafe in light of whatever is happening in the news. Or maybe we have a cultural connection or a family connection or country connection to someplace that's under siege or conflict right now. So I don't know if I gave that answer in a way that serves you, Hindy, but certainly tell me a little bit about what came up for you.
Well, what came up for me, interestingly enough, is safety is something different for men and different for women.
Oh, yeah.
As a woman, my safety net is smaller, I believe, because historically, women have been attacked. Women walking on the street are concerned about their environment, I think, a lot more than men.
Mm-hmm.
And so the chaos of what's going on in the world today, I think energetically also affects the feeling of safety. And I'm wondering, Brian, as a man, do you think you feel more safe than I do as a woman?
Quite possible, quite probable. I will say, though, there is some things that are baked into our cultural patterns in the past that are starting to shift. That makes it so this conversation, I believe, will have high level, high value, positive outcome down the road. The Me Too movement that came out a few years ago was very informative for me, because I was aware of the statistics, for example, of women who'd been assaulted. If I'm not mistaken, back in those days, it was like 1 in 5 college women had an incident, and 1 in 7 women throughout their history had an incident that was, this is just according to data that it was reported in the street, that women were having these assault issues, and including the most aggravated forms of them. And I came to the conclusion, though, during the Me Too movement, when I got a chance to talk to my friends, and most of my friends are women.
Lucky you.
Like, well, and I think that's, you know, they're, anyway, putting that into perspective is that the an ugly came out of it, but a beautiful thing came out of it too, because I got a chance to change my reference. So I was looking at FBI data or collected data that was out there. I came to the conclusion, after talking to everybody that was in my sharing space in my journey, or I was sharing space in their journey type of thing, that it was probably closer to it 100%, that women would have some sort of situation that happened during their lives where they were a target strictly because they were women. Or their energy guaranteeing you that if it was just about them being minimized or marginalized, that absolutely is 100%. Because I've seen so many societal patterns, it would be impossible for a woman not to have it someplace along their journey gone into a situation where they were told they weren't smart enough, that, you know, whatever it was that was kind of caught up in that old world societal pattern that also resulted in men's thinking or people's thinking in general. We still to this day have men and women who think we can't have a female president.
Well, that's why
I don't share that conviction, but I hear this all the time, and I'm going, like, what's that about? You know, and it's like, and it kind of seems sort of funny to me, is that one of the comments I hear is, you don't want a woman who can be emotional, who has access to the nuclear football, which is how you can launch things. I'm going, so who started all the wars before this? It was always men, but that doesn't count. So these are the kinds of things that cross my mind. So going back to this idea, is women feeling safe because of that historical pattern, I get it. And then because of things like the Me Too movement, we're starting to see massive shifts. Like on Hollywood sets, they have absolutely gone to the point where it used to be kind of when you decided to do it, but when you have women and men, or or even the same-sex situations on camera that might be of the romantic or other sensitive things, they now have people on the set whose expertise is to make sure everybody feels safe and comfortable, or as comfortable as you can be, I guess, if you're doing a scene without clothes on. I don't know, that could be, depends on the person, but you're starting to see these massive shifts where people are not allowing the scenarios to even take place. The casting couch may have gotten close to it being erased, although you still hear stories coming out of Hollywood. So as these things are starting to create light of day, or get light of day on them, we're starting to see that even people, and then just not to minimize that women have been put in a place where they can feel unsafe more often. We're finding out that there are a lot of men who have gone through similar experiences, not necessarily to the same dimensions or the same percentages. We're still finding out men have been going through this as well. And therefore, it's about bringing everything to another level of awareness. And then the fact, if you think about being safe, as we move through our conversation, I believe a lot of this will be about talking about awareness and safety going hand in hand. And I don't mean situational awareness where I have to always have mace in my hand or whatever the case may be. And I'm talking about by raising to the public view all of these situations more frequently, we can adjust to a new equilibrium where it is absolutely everybody should feel safe.
Interesting. As you were speaking, Brian, what came to mind for me, and aside from the direction that you took the conversation, as little girls, very often we're taught to not talk louder than the boys, or not to stand up and outshine the boys, or so many other things. And so now, today, you have so many women in the workforce, and we have to give ourselves permission that it's safe for us to speak up. Because in the past, a woman might have had a great idea that she told a male coworker, and he was the one that presented it and got all the accolades.
Right.
So there's so many, safety is a really interesting journey.
Well,
And
awareness is also part of the power dynamic, right?
absolutely.
So as we become more and more aware that we can have a voice, as we become more and more aware that we should have a voice, so we become more aware that we can use that voice in a very overt way, then we start, any individual who feels unempowered can get at least some more power back. And it's in that awareness, that power that comes from that is that you end up feeling more safe as well. Because the more practiced you are at this, the more you know what you can do. I want to go back to what you were just saying too, is that societal thing where like boys will be boys and girls will be girls, and girls need to look pretty and be attractive and don't want to say anything that might upset that pretty and attractive thing. It's like that whole mechanism was like skewed in a very unempowering way, because it was really saying is that you need to make yourself presentable to be a target.
Wow.
And then when you become a
Wow.
target, you shouldn't have any complaints about it because you caused it.
Mhm.
You were too pretty or whatever, too submissive or whatever the case may be. And that sort of primed the pump for women to not have power because of the societal conditionings and expectations that kind of go with those things. And I'm not trying to brag about this, but I reared my daughter to not think about, she's very striking. She's a very physically attractive woman, but we didn't talk much about that. We talked more about her power, her mind, her heart, all these other things, so that we launched her into the world in a slightly different way than some of our peer families who were really focused on appearance. But you start to see that that's not uncommon. I just saw on one of the shorts channels, TikTok or YouTube, I can't remember which one, a woman whose daughter got sent home from school because her skirt was too short. She'd gone through the whole day practically, and then at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, almost an hour before school's over, she's being told your mom has to come pick you up and take you home. You're not here in accordance with dress code. And then the question came up is why this dress code is set like this. Well, we don't want to make the boys uncomfortable and make sure they can learn. I'm going like, aren't we teaching the wrong people the wrong thing? Like, why can't we teach the boys to stick to themselves and pay attention to what they're supposed to pay attention to, rather than blaming the woman for their wandering eyes? And I imagine there's an argument for saying, well, let's do both or whatever the case may be. But it does point to this, that we still have societal conditioning stuck inside of our school systems and other parameters or other places in our society where this can, uh, rear its ugly head. Yet I still think we're adding awareness to the process. Like when this woman was on the shorts channel talking about her daughter's experience and saying, I am not allowing my daughter to change her behavior to make some boy comfortable. I gave her that power. I want her to have that power to do what she wants with her body and have her own agency. And I think that's huge, that she was teaching her daughter the empowerment of her own agency, even if it was at the expense of her being sent home from school.
Well, I want to say something about that, Brian, because I think also that there's something to be said about respect. Respect. You know that song?
Want me to sing it?
Sometimes we go too far the opposite way so that we can prove a point. And there are places where it's expected that you dress respectfully. If you're going to a temple, a mosque, a church, there's a certain way that is expected of you. Now, if you want to come in dressed however you want, you're not going to be thrown out. But there's a place, I really believe that we've gone too far, that there's a place to make a statement, but there's a place also when we don't respect each other, we don't respect ourselves, and it starts with respect for self. If you're dressing this way out of respect for yourself and you really blah, 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 one thing. But just to show that I can, so I will, without having respect. And I think we've lost a lot of respect in our society today.
I think there's always been this argument about who's honoring tradition and culture and who's crossing the line and all this. And this has always been I'll even use the word a battle. I mean, this is why we even today in politics have this set of extremes here, is because they're all pulling against each other to say, no, 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 my way is the right way. And it's all the people in the middle are getting stuck. Look, I never saw a picture of this young woman that I was just talking about before, but her mom described it as it was 2 fingers above her knee. It wasn't like she was showing up in a mini skirt or a bikini to go study at school. So and the question comes down to is that where does somebody's agency become more important than somebody else's societal based and rule, that kind of thing. And I don't think I have a perfect answer for this, other than just saying is that if she was already, this young woman was already in school for the bulk of the day before somebody complained, I would have to say is that whoever did the complaining probably was the one with the issue, not the girl.
Yeah.
Because nobody else said anything during the day.
Yeah.
So my argument for this one is on the side of the young woman with her agency, based on what I know. And there are a lot of these things in society, like when my daughter was going to school and my daughter and I were studying martial arts together, something we both enjoyed doing with each other. It was kind of one of the things that really nicely bonded us. And I was excited for how strong she was and how fast she was and how skilled she was in all of this absorption of the way the martial arts was working. And it was more of a spiritual philosophy. It wasn't about the battle or the fighting, but I was just always admiring with how much it gave her determination and dedication and consistency and all these other things that were coming out of that training as well. But one of the things that we did talk about was that was empowering for her to be able to be safe. And she would always go like, I can't use my safety in school because I'll get into trouble. I said, you don't have to worry about that. Your mom and dad have your back. She goes, well, what do I do if this happens? I say, this is the step. As long as it's not a life and death matter or not an immediate threat. If something happens, you tell the school. You tell somebody at the school. If they don't take any action, well, the first thing is you tell the person. If they don't do anything, then you tell the school. If the school doesn't do anything about it, then all bets are off. Your safety comes first. And she had the training to do something about it. So,
that's why empowerment is so important.
Right. But it also goes with awareness, right? I mean,
Yes.
you can have all the power in the world. We've seen this before. Is when we were looking, and just as an example, when we were looking for martial arts schools for her to study, I actually studied after she did. I started because she did it. She wanted to do it from the youngest of ages. And we were looking for a school for her to go to. And a couple of the schools had like open fight night on Wednesdays. It was that this was not the message we wanted our daughter to grow up inside of, is that, this is all about the fight. It's really about situational awareness. And so we found a martial arts school, which I think was light years ahead of all the others, because it really was about situational awareness, the associated empowerment, being high integrity, consistent, persistent, dedicated, determined, all these other things that were going on. And then being very capable.
So when you use the word, Brian, situational awareness, right? In order for you to be situationally aware, you have to be in the present moment, right?
Very much so.
Not in a fear base or in a, oh my God, or who the heck, you can't be in your head storytelling. You really have to be present. And I think that for us as human beings, if we were present so that we were able to really see the situational awareness rather than the stories before we even walked out the door or before we went to the class or whatever, we've already created an energy for ourselves of fear or an expectation of something terrible to happen. But by empowering ourselves to live in situational awareness, that really helps us in this chaotic world, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something. Now we're talking about the human condition now, which is very rich with complexity in some cases. I think in many ways the human condition is very simple to determine, except there are all these factors that go from person to person to person, including societal patterns, parental patterns, educational patterns, whatever the other things that are being jammed into their lives can create some fluctuation in how things get managed. But to your point, I should say, the idea of being present is not so easy for people because we are often looking so far down the road through the windshield or so far back through the rearview mirror that we're really not in a position to know what's really going on immediately with us right now.
Bingo.
That isn't, I think it's not something you can just snap your fingers and say, I'm going to stay present. You can try. And to some degree, you can do that. Like when I'm going to step out on the street, I'm going to be aware of everything that's going on around me. But I could say from my own perspective is if I stepped out on the street trying to be always, currently aware, but I'm carrying around this fear-based thing, it's going to show up in my posture. It's going to show up in how I talk. It's going to show up in how I walk or drive or whatever the case may be. And I might be putting a target on my back just by virtue of the fact that even though I may be trying to be more in the now, I'm still in the now carrying this load of fear.
Wow.
Fear, in my opinion, fear strips agency from people because it's the stories. You use the word story. It's the stories that are inside of those fear things that will dominate the show and really do make it almost impossible to be completely present. It's when we release those fears that we get a chance to walk the planet without all that fear. And I talked about this in the very beginning of this conversation, right? So far, I've dominated the conversation. I talked about this in the very beginning of my soliloquy, that the nature of our empowerment starts with awareness, and awareness is about what's going on inside of us and being able to release those things that don't serve us anymore and embrace those things that really serve us. And when you have that experience, you get to drop off those stories or shed them that are the ones that cause all the fear and start embracing the ones that give you all the power.
So let me ask you something. That sounds really great. But what was your journey? How did you get there?
We should, by the way, folks, just based on that question, you have to add 4 hours to the show.
Stay tuned for part 2, but I think it's so important because it's easy to preach, live in the moment,
absolutely.
be in the moment, do this, do that. But if I'm, like you said before, we were joking around, you said, if I'm in the basement of the elevator and I don't know how to get up and the elevator.
Yeah, well, you were joking about, let's pretend this, we were talking about an elevator before we hit the record button and we say, what floor are you on? And I told you I was in the basement. Right. And you said, well, the good thing is we both almost said it at the same time, is that means I have no place to go but up.
So
So
how
I
did you
want,
get from the basement?
yeah, and using that analogy, I would like to say is that I believe everybody has the opportunity to be empowered through self-awareness and growth and releasing the fear-based stories so that they can have powerful stories that they can embrace. Not everybody will do that. So let's just be like, if somebody hears this and goes, not everybody will do that, they can just resign and just stay who they are. That's their choice. What I want to say is that it doesn't mean you have to resign yourself to something. If you really aren't happy about how your journey is going, then you can work on it to become powerful, self-power, become more connected to love than fear and all these other parts of the human condition that can be a representation of what we're here to do or what it's all about, depending on what your philosophy is. But putting that into perspective, like if you wanted to talk about my journey, I'll give you like the little short compendium here.
Great.
I grew up in the shadow of a father who had his own demons, and at the drop of a hat would lose his temper. And if I was in the room, didn't matter who else was in the room, I was the target. It's almost like maybe that was the instruction set he was working with, that somehow or other that I was either his projection or his reflection, and he needed to do something to me when he was angry. And I'm not too worried about what that was. I don't need to know what the story was. I just know what the effect was, and that is that the belt was coming off. I was in trouble, and for me, that put me at a very young age in survival mode, because fear and survival go hand in hand. So it put me very much in survival mode, and I learned very, very quickly that the only person I could count on was me, but I didn't have any compass or orientation, or for that matter, even any knowledge about how to really do that. So when you figure that out as you're going along, what you end up doing is kind of creating a world by how you want to be seen and the world you want to see exist. So, and that little bubble of curation is popularly called narcissism. It's a spectrum. So just because somebody's narcissistic doesn't mean they're evil and malignant, although there are malignant narcissists, and they will probably go to their grave a malignant narcissist. It seems that the farther down that darkness path, the darkness area of the spectrum you go, the less likely you have any chance for redemption. But putting that aside, that put me in a place of always being reactive, not really focusing on awareness. I may have moments of awareness along the way. I wasn't particularly self-reflective. I had all the answers. I was super strong, couldn't be seen as weak, couldn't be seen as not knowing. And if somebody challenged me, then the popular term is gaslighting. I would do whatever I could to make sure that I was right and they were wrong, even if I had to knock them off center with their viewpoint or whatever the case may be. And so my journey is really steeped in this discussion about survival, what the fragility that may be induced into our spirit as we're kids, and what we do to survive can carry with us for a long time. So you can be narcissistic, you can be a fragile, a victim, you could be, in fact, when we're talking earlier about men and women, men are often shoehorned into a narcissistic bubble, and women are very often shoehorned into a victim state, not even knowing that we're putting them there, but we're making somebody less empowered and somebody else more empowered, but not necessarily in the sense of warrior power, but more like the power of abuse. Even if I'm in that victim bubble, I often abuse myself if I was in that victim bubble. And by the way, some narcissists can also be victims. I mean, I look at my own journey with my father. I would say my journey into narcissism was begotten with a victim stage. So anyway, let's move this real quickly forward, because I can tell you this, I spent decades living in that bubble. But because I became a parent at a later age and saw how I wanted to be a good parent for her, my daughter was instrumental in helping, being a sort of a light for me to look at things differently, become more self-reflective, more aware. It took time. But it also accelerated. So, and that's why I studied hypnotherapy, because I found it a very powerful tool for shifting out of that victim state or that fragile state that puts you into the survival postures that are ridiculously reactive, almost always drama-based, and really keep you very, very stuck. And I just, not to, in conventional societal terms, I was very successful, triple six-figure income, very high level functions when I worked with companies, and also I was an entrepreneur much of my journey. So I had contact with money and tools and toys and whatever else that was out there. So all the trappings, the modern trappings of what success looks like, I'm completely familiar with, even though they weren't making me happy, and they weren't really doing anything to improve my human condition. Okay, that's the origin story.
Fast question. In your case, it was giving birth or yes, bringing a child into this world and realizing that you wanted to do better. For the average person, if there is such a thing as an average person who could be a narcissist, does it generally take something to happen for them to wake up and say, no more, I need to make a change?
Yeah. You commonly, people will call it a spiritual 2x4. You get like a whack to the head.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be a non-positive whack to the head, although I think I was receiving those whacks over the decades, over and over and over again, but just because I was so reactive and so self-absorbed, and that it was not, I really didn't take a lot of time to look at myself as something that needed to change. I was always thinking about all the other people that if they just did it my way, they would be like, whatever wacky thinking I had was that my way was the right way, because that's what made me feel good about myself. Because if my way wasn't the right way, then I would have to be self-critical, or maybe whatever else the thinking was that could have gone on in my head. It was I had a series of door openings. I can't go through all of them because there were really, quite a few. If I look back in my life, I go, oh, there was an opportunity to learn spiritual 2x4. And maybe I learned enough, or a little bit, and then add that to the next one that came along years later or whatever, that eventually, once we adopted my daughter. And so once she came into the universe and I suddenly felt like I was no longer the center, there was something that came through that was not just me. And it didn't stick. Like, it wasn't like, snap, I'm fine. It was just another, maybe bigger door opening. And I realized that my daughter needed somebody to show up for her differently than I was showing up for the whole universe. So I started.
Let me ask you something, Brian. The word that keeps coming to me is love. It wasn't a smack on the head that shifted you, but the feeling that you were able to receive love from a child. It touched your heart.
Although the moment I held her,
yes,
she was crying and angry with the world and didn't want to be there, and I'm the guy holding her.
Right.
So I can't say that it was love from her, because she was in a state
No,
of
but
like,
the love that you felt
yeah,
inside
so
of you
some,
and held her.
and one of the challenges with people who are on that, that fragile ego part of the human spectrum is that it clouds love in a very dramatic way, because you're so injured and you're so lacking that, and so lacking a compass and orientation around what love really is, that it was not a conscious thing that happened. And again, it was just a partial, maybe bigger than before, but a partial door opening. And it took a number of years of being her father and other things that kept coming. So sure, love was part of the equation. That's part of the spiritual 2x4. Not, as I said, not every aspect of being hit with a spiritual experience has to be positive or non-positive. It's something that gets us moving and gets us thinking. And we have to be, or we get to be, lined up for these things. The more we experience them, the more we start, reflecting. So for me, the power of all of this begins with moments or seconds of self-reflection, however fleeting they may be in the beginning, but a willingness to continue to do that. And I will tell you that in early days of self-reflection, it was very painful. So I would very often, whatever it was that was going on, just sweep it under the carpet. Grief in particular was a huge one. So, so it took quite a few years, but it was an acceleration. So as each thing built on something else, and I became more self-aware, then those things that were popularly called narcissism, which was my fragile ego living in survival mode, began to no longer be the story I had to live by.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So when you work with people, you help them go on that self-reflective journey.
Yep. And I'll just say, I would like to say it's interesting is that many of my clients, whether they're business clients or we're working on their personal transformation, many of my clients are either men who are at the edge of awakening or having some awakening and we're giving them tools to grow, or women who've lived in the shadow of those fragile ego, and they themselves have a different kind of fragile ego. So it's really about, when you talked about power or empowerment, it really is about building some empowerment into people's journeys that allows them to have these honest conversations with themselves. That's not easy.
Yeah.
Having a self-honest conversation is not easy, because it's so easy to go ahead and say, it's not about me. This is all happening to me. I don't have any role in what happened to me. I just have to sit here and deal with it. When in reality is that so many things happen that I don't even notice these days because it's no longer affecting me the way it would have. I don't take things personally like I used to. I have pretty healthy conversations with myself, and and it's a continuous journey. I have really had an interesting self conversation a few weeks ago that brought up a little new thing, something else I hadn't really processed before, and go, wow, it was uncomfortable, but cool at the same time. So,
And the journey, we are, I say we're a work in progress.
yeah,
Sometimes when things come up, I go, oh, I thought I've already done that. But
yeah.
maybe I didn't do it completely. So
Sometimes
here,
there are layers. Sometimes
layers.
there are layers. In fact, maybe almost every time there are layers. Like, for example, in my own journey, grief was one of those things. Grief was something I swept under the carpet. In order to manage grief in our journeys, we really need to have some of that power, because grief is one of the most painful things that can happen. And if we're not prepared to deal with that pain and learn how to, and I use the word manage, but really, frankly, it's more like embrace it. so once we learn how to embrace the pain, we in somehow or other, the way I look at it, we actually take the power of that pain away by embracing it. It's almost like it's coming at you, it's mean, it's ugly, and then you just give it a big hug, and all of a sudden it has no power. And that's what processing grief really, in my estimation, looks like, visually looks like, when it comes to managing our journeys. And that it's not just grief. I mean, it could be, I could feel betrayed or abandoned, or maybe I don't have any low sense of worth, or whatever the case may be. All of those things, we can take away the power from those things by just giving them a big hug. And I make it sound very simple. There's some work involved to do that. We can embrace the messages that come from our emotions and turn them into very positive experiences.
Well, I'm going to take it back to right to the beginning. So how do I feel safe in a chaotic world? I just want to share, for me, I give it up. I have trust and faith that I'm here for whatever length of time I'm here. I don't know how long that is.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe as long as I'm here, whatever the journey is, I really, even if I start off feeling unsafe or unsure, I do give it up. I let go. And I feel safe in not needing to control, because if I have to control it, I'm in big trouble. So in that letting go and not having to have control, that's where my safety comes in. What about you, Brian?
Actually, control is a good indicator for how much fear we have in our lives. The more we try to control things, and that's where I was in that fragile ego stage of my life. So it's all about controlling everything, controlling what you look like, controlling how people see you, controlling who's in your journey, controlling how people in your journey are going to do what you want them to do. Those kinds of controlling things that take place, and those are attached to fear. Because when if you look at a lot of the woes we have in society is for people having a desperate need to feel certainty, which is what control supposedly gives them. And one of the beautiful parts about life, and we get taught this when we play and all these other things as a kid, if we have an opportunity to play, is that there is the unexpected, there is uncertainty, and that can be an adventure. That can be a powerful way to be, but we lose sight of that. As we get more and more and more caught up in survival mode, we start to lose that play. We start to lose the power of play and the uncertainty that play brings to us, because the outcome in play is variable. It's never certain unless you cheat. And if you're cheating, that's a fear-based construct, right? So when it's about playing, whatever it is, a game, playing life, whatever the thing is let life unfold for you. Let it be the adventure it was meant to be. And let's be resilient instead of trying to be certain. Because and resilience is really an outcome of self-empowerment and self-awareness and self-reflection. Because if we're not able to be resilient, then we're stuck, absolutely stuck. And it's going to be a fear-based thing. And being stuck with your fear, that's a prison. And it's not a place of being happy. And really what I would argue is, if anybody doesn't feel completely happy with their life, I'm like totally in love with life. And my life isn't perfect. I have days, car breaks, or I lost $100 on the street, whatever it is that makes my day a little bit go, oh, what just happened? That doesn't feel good, whatever. So it's not like I'm sitting here, the light's on me and I'm in it, but I'm in love with life. And I'm so in love with life because of my determination to be awake, and my determination to let life unfold as an adventure, and love. And especially when you were in the protective ego posture that I was in before, I wasn't particularly self-loving. And now I really have a much better relationship with myself. as you say, it's work in progress, but I am truly, truly, truly on the happier end of the spectrum. I love life.
That's so beautiful. And I love adventure. And so I'm so thrilled that we were able to go on this adventure together today.
Mhm.
And I trust that it's been enlightening for someone. And Brian, how do people get in touch with you?
Um, I have the QR code here. They can just reach out to me, and they can connect with me whatever way works for them. There's a scheduler, there's contact information, and so on. Can I leave the conversation with this quote
Please.
from, I believe, I'm gonna have to double check this at some point, but I believe this came from George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, is that we don't stop playing because we grow older. We grow older because we stop playing. And that is a very insightful statement from my perspective, because it really does say, are you in the loving, thriving, happy with life part of the society where you can be playful and resilient and maybe even irreverent? You know, you can just say, like, what's that expression? I may have to grow older, but I don't have to grow up. Whatever you want to do with that one. Or you could be over here in the prison of stuckness and survival and fear and all those other things. And so if anybody's in that fear-based place and they just suddenly realize that that's not what they want, that I encourage them to start playing.
Well, I've really enjoyed playing with you, Brian. And in my mature days of senior citizenship, I look forward to playing a lot. And thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Okay.
Everybody keep well.
Bye-bye.